In the twilight of 20th century European history, there are figures whose names remain forever in the shadow of monstrous events. Rudolf Walter Richard Hess was one such figure, a man who rose to the pinnacle of the Nazi hierarchy, only to commit one of the most enigmatic acts of World War II. On April 26, 1894, in Alexandria, Egypt, a boy was born into the family of a German merchant, destined to witness and participate in the greatest catastrophes of the century. Fritz Hess, his father, was a successful businessman who had built a trading empire on the shores of the Mediterranean. The family lived comfortably, surrounded by the exoticism of the East, yet faithfully preserved German traditions and values. Rudolf's childhood was spent between two worlds. The Arab bazaars of Alexandria existed alongside the rigid German traditions of the family hearth. His father dreamed that his son would continue the family business, become a merchant, and multiply the Hess fortune. But fate had prepared an entirely different path for young Rudolf. At 14, he was sent to Germany, to boarding school. This was 1908. The world did not yet know what storm was approaching the European continent. Rudolf found himself torn from his family, thrown into the strict Prussian educational system, where discipline was valued above all else. He was a shy youth who preferred books to noisy gatherings, inclined toward dreaminess and romanticism. Then the First World War erupted. In August 1914, 19-year-old Hess, against his father's wishes, volunteered for the Bavarian Infantry Regiment. The trenches of Verdun and the Somme transformed the dreamy youth into a hardened soldier. He was wounded twice, awarded the Iron Cross, and in 1918 transferred to the emerging aviation service. The sky attracted him more than the mud of the trenches. He became a fighter pilot, experiencing the exhilaration of flight and the proximity of death. But Germany lost the war. November 1918 brought not only armistice, but the collapse of everything the young officer believed in. The Kaiser abdicated. The country plunged into revolutionary chaos, German city streets filled with communists and separatists. For many frontline soldiers returning home, the world had collapsed. They felt betrayed, humiliated, robbed. Rudolf Hess was one of them. Munich in the early 20s was a cauldron where the most radical ideas boiled. The Bavarian capital became a haven for demobilized officers, monarchists, nationalists, and adventurers of all stripes. In beer halls and at rallies, parties, alliances, and conspiracies were born. In 1919, Hess enrolled at the University of Munich to study economics and geopolitics. His teacher was Professor Karl Haushofer, a geopolitics theorist who preached ideas about living space, the destiny of great nations, and the inevitability of the struggle for resources. These ideas fell on fertile ground in the soul of the young veteran. But the true encounter with destiny occurred in 1920. Hess first heard a speech by the then unknown Adolf Hitler. It was at the Hofbrauhaus beer hall, where the young National Socialist German Workers' Party gathered. Hitler spoke of betrayal, of the greatness of the German nation, of Jews and Marxists who had allegedly stabbed the undefeated army in the back. His words were like an electric shock. For Hess, this was a moment of revelation. He found someone who expressed all the vague indignation, all the anger, and all the hopes that lived in his soul. After that meeting, Rudolf Hess became one of the first members of the Nazi Party, receiving membership card number 16. In the following years, Hess became Hitler's shadow. He was devoted to him with almost religious fanaticism. When in November 1923 the Nazis attempted to seize power in Munich, the famous beer hall putsch, Hess marched alongside Hitler. The putsch failed, and Hess, wounded, fled to Austria. But the following year he voluntarily returned to Germany and surrendered to the police to share his Führer's fate. In Landsberg prison, where they found themselves together, their special bond was born. Hitler dictated his book, Mein Kampf, while Hess recorded, edited, and discussed ideas. He was not merely a secretary, he was a disciple, an apostle, a faithful follower. During those months behind prison walls, not only was the text of the book formed, but also the hierarchy that would determine the fates of millions. After his release from prison in 1925, Hess became an indispensable man in the party apparatus. He was an organizer, administrator, and coordinator. Lacking Goebbels' charisma or Himmler's cruelty, Hess nevertheless occupied a special place in the Nazi hierarchy, the place of the Führer's confidant. In 1932, he headed the political commission of the NSDAP, effectively becoming the second man in the party. When Hitler became Reich Chancellor of Germany in January 1933, Hess followed him into the corridors of power. In April of that year, he was appointed Deputy Führer for Party Affairs and received the right to sign laws on behalf of Hitler. Outwardly, this was the pinnacle of his career. Rudolf Hess became one of the most influential people in the Third Reich. His portrait hung next to Hitler's portraits. His speeches were broadcast on the radio. His signature appeared on documents that determined the lives of millions. But reality was more complex. In the bloody jungle of the Nazi leadership, Hess remained a strange figure. He did not participate in intrigues, did not build his own empire of power, did not accumulate wealth. His devotion to Hitler was absolute and selfless. This aroused suspicion among other Nazi leaders, Goering, Himmler, Bormann. They saw him as an eccentric, a dreamer, not of this world. Hess was indeed a strange man even by the standards of the Nazi elite. He was fascinated by astrology, homeopathy, and various occult teachings. He consulted with healers and clairvoyants. He believed in a mystical connection between the German race and cosmic forces. His wife Ilse shared these interests, and their house in Munich became something of a salon for enthusiasts of the esoteric. Yet Hess signed racial laws and participated in creating the repressive apparatus of the Third Reich. In his worldview, mysticism combined with the most brutal racism, romanticism with criminal ideology. This was a man of deep contradictions, and these contradictions led him toward catastrophe. By the late 30s, Hess began to feel he was losing influence. Hitler increasingly rarely sought his advice. Other Nazi leaders pushed him to the periphery of power. Particularly painful was the rise of Martin Bormann, his deputy, who was gradually taking control of the party apparatus. On September 1, 1939, Germany attacked Poland. World War II had begun. For Hess, this was a moment of triumph, and simultaneously the beginning of his downfall. The German army won victory after victory. Poland fell in a month. France capitulated in 6 weeks. Europe lay at Hitler's feet. But in this war, there was no place for Rudolf Hess. He was not a military commander, did not command armies, did not participate in planning operations. His administrative functions seemed insignificant against the backdrop of grandiose events. Goering commanded the Luftwaffe. Himmler built the SS Empire. Goebbels managed propaganda. And Hess signed papers and gave speeches
that few were interested in anymore. Particularly agonizing was the confrontation with Britain. In the summer of 1940, Germany won the Battle of France, but Britain did not surrender. Hitler hoped that after France's fall the British would ask for peace, but Winston Churchill, who became Prime Minister in May 1940, was unyielding. Britain continued the war alone. The Battle of Britain, the aerial battle of autumn 1940, ended in failure for the Luftwaffe. Hitler postponed plans for invading the islands, but the war continued, creating a strategic problem. Germany faced the prospect of a two-front war, in the west against Britain, in the east against the USSR, which was preparing for attack. In Rudolf Hess's head, a plan began to mature. He was convinced that the war with Britain was a historic mistake. Two great Germanic peoples, Germans and Anglo-Saxons, should not destroy each other when the real threat came from the east, from Bolshevism and Slavdom. These ideas were popular in certain circles both in Germany and in Britain. In England, there was a pacifist peace party. There were aristocrats sympathetic to Germany. There were those who considered Churchill a warmonger. Hess knew one such person. The Duke of Hamilton, a Scottish aristocrat and Royal Air Force pilot, had met with Hess at the 1936 Olympics in Berlin. They conversed and exchanged opinions. Hess remembered the Duke as a reasonable man who understood the need for peace between Germany and Britain. Perhaps through him, one could reach influential circles, King George VI, politicians ready to remove Churchill and conclude an honorable peace. The idea matured over months. Hess consulted with his old teacher Karl Haushofer, who had connections in Britain. He discussed the plan with astrologers and clairvoyants. He believed that destiny was calling him to commit a great deed that would change the course of history. Hitler did not know about this plan, or he knew but did not take it seriously, or he gave tacit consent that could later be denied. Historians still debate this, but the fact remains. On May 10, 1941, Rudolf Hess got into an airplane and embarked on the most mysterious flight of World War II. The day was clear. A Messerschmitt Bf-110, a twin-engine fighter, stood at the Augsburg airfield.
Hess was an experienced pilot. His skills, acquired during World War I, had not dulled. He carefully planned the route, studied maps, calculated fuel reserves. At 5:45 p.m., the aircraft took off and headed northwest, toward the North Sea. Hess flew alone, without escort, without permission, without contact with the ground. He crossed the North Sea at low altitude to avoid radar, then appeared over the east coast of Scotland. British radar detected a lone aircraft, but took it for a lost bomber. Fighters took off to intercept, but Hess was already heading inland. His target was Dungavel House, the Duke of Hamilton's estate in Scotland. But finding a specific building from the air proved impossible. Fuel was running out. Around 11 p.m., Hess bailed out near the village of Eaglesham. The Messerschmitt crashed to the ground and burned. Hess was discovered by local farmer David McLean, who was patrolling the area as a member of the local defense. The injured German introduced himself as Captain Alfred Horn and asked to be taken to the Duke of Hamilton. McLean called the police and army. Hess was arrested and placed under guard. The next day, the Duke of Hamilton was brought to him. Hess revealed his true identity and outlined his mission. He had come to propose peace. Germany was ready to end the war in the West if Britain recognized German hegemony in Europe. Churchill must go. A peace government must come to power, and the two great nations could unite against their common enemy, Bolshevism. The Duke of Hamilton was shocked. He immediately contacted Prime Minister Churchill, who at that moment was at a country residence watching a Marx Brothers film. Hearing the news, Churchill uttered the phrase that became famous, "Hess or no Hess, I'm going to finish watching the film." The British government found itself in an unusual situation. One of the highest leaders of a hostile state had voluntarily arrived on their territory with proposals for peace. This opened possibilities, but also created problems. Churchill was not going to negotiate with Germany. For him, France's capitulation and the attack on Britain were unforgivable crimes. Moreover, Britain hoped for the United States to enter the war, and any contacts with the Nazis could damage relations with Washington. But the Hess affair could be used for propaganda purposes. The British announced that the Deputy Führer had fled from Germany. This was meant to demonstrate discord in the Nazi leadership, the regime's weakness, the beginning of its disintegration. Hess was kept in various places of detention, first in Scotland, then in London, then in a specially equipped estate. Intelligence officers, psychiatrists, and diplomats held conversations with him. Everyone tried to understand. Was he insane, or was this flight part of Hitler's secret plan? Hess himself was in a state of profound shock. He expected to be received as a messenger of peace, to be taken to the king or influential politicians, for negotiations to begin. Instead, he was kept in isolation, like an ordinary prisoner of war. No one took his mission seriously. His proposals were rejected outright. In Germany, the reaction was no less dramatic. On May 12th, when it became clear that Hess had not returned and had probably landed in Britain, Hitler flew into a rage. He convened an emergency meeting of Nazi leaders. Goering laughed to tears. His longtime rival had committed political suicide. Goebbels feverishly devised how to present this event to the public. In the end, a communiqué was issued stating that Hess suffered from hallucinations, had become a victim of charlatan astrologers, and committed an insane act without the Führer's knowledge. He was declared mad and a traitor. Arrests of astrologers, healers, and everyone associated with esoteric circles began. Hess himself was stripped of all posts and titles in absentia. Interestingly, later, when the war took a catastrophic turn for Germany, Hitler admitted to close associates that Hess might have been right. The two-front war was destroying Germany. But in May 1941, when the attack on the USSR was a month away, the Führer could not allow himself to show weakness. Rudolf Hess spent 5 years in British captivity. These were years of the slow fading of his hopes, gradual realization of the scale of his own mistake, and the approaching collapse of the entire world he had helped build. He was kept in relative comfort, a separate room, decent food, books. But it was captivity, isolation, absence of freedom. Hess began to show signs of mental disorder. He complained of pains that doctors could not explain. He claimed they were trying to poison him. He suffered from amnesia, forgetting events of his own life, then remembering them again. Psychiatrists still debate whether these symptoms were genuine or whether Hess was simulating madness, hoping to avoid responsibility. But nothing changed. Hess remained a prisoner of the Cold War, a pawn in a great game. On August 17, 1987, on a summer day, a guard found Rudolf Hess dead in a summer house on the prison grounds. An electrical cord was around his neck. The official conclusion stated, suicide by hanging. Hess was 93 years old. He had spent 41 years in Spandau Prison and 46 years in captivity, starting from 1941. More than half his life, he had been deprived of freedom. But the circumstances of his death immediately sparked controversy. The family refused to believe it was suicide. Wolf Rudiger Hess pointed to inconsistencies in the official version. How could a 93-year-old man suffering from arthritis and barely able to raise his arms hang himself? Why would he write a suicide note if he had attempted suicide many times before and never left any notes? Conspiracy theories emerged. Some claimed that Hess was killed by British intelligence, fearing he would reveal secrets of his 1941 flight. Others spoke of murder by Soviet agents who did not want his release. Still others saw a conspiracy by neo-Nazis trying to create a martyr. The official British position remained unchanged. Hess committed suicide. Psychiatrists pointed to his long history of depression and previous suicide attempts. He was old, disappointed, had lost all hope. Suicide was a logical end to his tragic life. Shortly after Hess's death, Spandau Prison was demolished. It was turned into a pile of stones, so the site would not become a pilgrimage place for neo-Nazis. A supermarket now stands on this spot. History loves such cruel, ironic endings. The story of Rudolf Hess is the story of a man who devoted his entire life to ideas that led to the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century. He was not the chief architect of Nazi crimes. He did not command Einsatzgruppen, did not build gas chambers, did not plan the Holocaust. But he was there at the beginning. He helped create the ideology. He signed laws that laid the foundation for genocide. His guilt was not in specific murders, but in creating the system that made these murders possible. His flight to Scotland remains one of the most mysterious episodes of World War II. Was it an act of madness, or a desperate attempt to stop the approaching catastrophe? Did he act on his own initiative, or was he carrying out Hitler's secret mission? Could history have gone differently if the British had taken his mission seriously? Most likely not. By May 1941, the war had already acquired its own momentum. Nazi Germany was doomed to conflict with the USSR, and American entry into the war was only a matter of time. Hess's mission was doomed from the start because it was based on illusions about the possibility of negotiating with a regime that embodied evil. 46 years of captivity became a slow execution for Hess. He outlived all his comrades, all his ideas, the entire world he had helped create. He became a living ghost, a reminder of a past that the world wanted to forget. His death brought no answers. It only added one more mystery to the list of questions surrounding this strange, tragic figure.